Hi, everybody. Brian Valerio, Vice President in the Proxy Solicitation Group at Alliance Advisors. I wanted to talk a little bit about ESG issues that we think are likely to be a major focus of institutional investors for the 2020 proxy season, as well as during the fall off-season outreach efforts between institutional investors and issuers. So let's talk about some of the big focuses that we think institutional investors are going to have in the ESG arena for 2020. We think one of the biggest issues is going to be human capital management and corporate culture, We also think board diversity is going to continue to be a pressing issue, as it has been for the past few years. We think climate change is going to remain a key focus of institutional investors. And we think that political issues are going to be at the forefront this year, given that 2020 is a US presidential election year. So let's talk a little bit about human capital management and why we think that is likely to be so important for the 2020 season. Just a few short months ago, when the economy was roaring, there was this competition for top flight talent that these companies were experiencing. A lot of the industries that public companies operate in are highly dependent on having a very skilled workforce. Now, these employees are very desirable candidates. So there's a lot of emphasis from the institutional investors to ensure that companies have adequate programs in place to attract, retain, and advance their employees so that they can keep the best, most talented people in the company, because that really is a lot of the value of these companies, is having these employees in place. So we think that that is likely to remain a key issue in light of COVID-19 and maybe even become a bigger issue because of the increased unemployment that you're going to see. So these companies are going to have to struggle with a situation where they've got these great talented employees, but they might not be making the same revenue as a company that they were making a few months ago. So now how are they going to continue to operate as effectively, and how are they going to be able to utilize these employees if they don't have the same revenue that's coming in? And are they going to be able to keep all these employees if they don't have the same revenue coming in? So there's going to be kind of a balance between what do we do for the short term, with the lack of revenue, versus the long term of keeping our most talented employees. And some of these employees might be expensive. So it's going to be kind of a hard position that these companies are in, and something that the institutional investors are definitely going to be interested to see how these companies manage that process. Another thing that is going to continue to be an increased or an emphasis of institutional investors, we think, is board diversity. But not just in terms of gender diversity. It seems like gender diversity has gone extremely well for companies. A lot of boards now have at least one, if not more, women on the board, and it seems like that is continuing to grow, and that will continue to be an emphasis of institutional investors, no doubt. They will continue to want to see expanded women on the board, but I also think that there's going to be an increase of an emphasis on ethnic and racial diversity, on these boards. There's going to be an increased emphasis to have more people of color and more people of different ethnicities serving on these boards. So how are we seeing this manifest itself? Well, Vanguard, for one, is going to ask companies to disclose information about the makeup of the board, not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of ethnicity and racial makeup. So that's a major change. And the New York City Comptroller actually proposed putting in a Rooney Rule situation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the NFL, the Rooney Rule is actually a very interesting proposition whereby anytime there is a vacancy for a head coach position or a general manager position in the NFL, those are basically the two most important positions in the NFL, there's a requirement that these teams have to at least interview a person of color or a minority in order to see if they are a potential fit for that role. So that's something that the New York City Comptroller is saying public companies should look at instituting a similar role for open board seats as well as CEO positions. So that's going to be an interesting thing to develop, to see how that develops and see if that gains some traction. As I mentioned earlier, climate change is going to continue to be a main focus. There's so much evidence going on in the world that humans are contributing to the rise in global temperatures, and this is going to continue to be an increased emphasis for institutional investors to see what companies can do to combat this, and also to understand what their exposure is and how a continued increase in global temperature may negatively impact their revenues and the way that the company operates. So that's going to continue to be an emphasis, most likely, for these institutional investors. And finally, the thing that we think is going to be very important for the 2020 season are political issues. Political contributions and campaign contributions are going to be a big focus of institutional investors. There's a number of shareholder proposals that have already been submitted on this issue, and there will continue to be. This is always a hot button issue, but given the political climate of 2020, the presidential election that's happening in November, it is going to be even more of a focus. This also gets heightened by the fact that the Business Roundtable had the statement just last year about what is the company's purpose and should a company consider other stakeholders in addition to just the bottom line. And when you couple this with the pressure on CEOs to make kind of outspoken statements on some political policies, companies are going to have to look at how those statements, do they align with our business interests? Do they align with what's best for the company? And couple that with the pressure on disclosing political contributions, there should be a lot of conversation and a lot of focus this year around political issues between issuers and their institutional investors. We think that's going to be a major component of these conversations. So these are just some of the key issues, some of the key environmental and social issues that we think are likely to be focuses for the 2020 proxy season. So if you have any questions about these issues, want to learn more, please reach out. Thanks.